Okay, hello everybody. Thanks for joining us today for the NSS virtual convention. My name is Joel Despain. I'm going to talk about a kind of new project we've started in Panama, country down there at the tip of North America. It's a neat place with some odd life and some odd adventures. It turns out there's quite a bit of limestone in Panama, including this island known as Bird Island that was kind of in our area, and of course has a couple of nice caves right through it there on the coast. Okay, I have to give credit where credit is due. Keith Christenson was really the first person to really check out the caves in this area. Of course, the local people knew about them for hundreds of years, but Keith was the first caver, the first person with maybe a scientific perspective to take a look at these caves. Keith is a bat biologist. He lives in the U.S., but he specializes in work in tropical bats, Central America, the Caribbean. He's done a lot of work in countries in that part of the world. And he first described some of these caves. It wasn't for Keith, we wouldn't even know that these existed. These photographs are actually of Panamanian bat species in an article that was in Smithsonian Magazine that Keith worked on. And we also have to thank James Cobbett. James hosted us when Jed and I first got into Panama City for this trip back in December. He's a British caver who's really taken charge of checking out Panamanian caves. He's been all over the country. Up and down the coast, in the mountains, all over the place, looking for caves, mostly in pretty small bodies of limestone. And he's had a lot of success with that. Found quite a few small caves. He's had a lot of help from some British and Irish caving friends who've come over. He was super helpful and friendly with us, gave us a lot of key information that led us to do our trip to Bocas del Toro area and do particularly a couple of caves there. So here's Panama. Of course, it's the country that we think of as connecting North and South America, but it runs roughly east to west. Panama City is there in about the middle with the Panama Canal running between the Pacific and the Caribbean. And then where we went is Bocas del Toro, straight to the left, to the west from Panama City, over by the Costa Rican border. You can see Bocas del Toro in a red dot for the provincial capital, and the Archipelago de Bocas del Toro for the islands. We started the trip, though, in Panama City. Panama City is a big, thriving metropolis, by far the largest city in Central America. Big financial center, big shipping center. Reminds me almost more of a Chinese city. Lots of high-rises, lots more high-rises going up. This view is from Metropolitano National Park, which is in the city, a nice plus if you live there. And it's the beginning of a series of national parks that go all the way across the peninsula to the Caribbean side, parallel to the canal to protect the watershed. It takes a lot of water to make the Panama Canal work. Here's the Bocas area where we flew up to from Panama City, about a 45-minute flight. Where the little airplane symbol is where the airport is and the provincial capital. And then we worked on Isla Colón, that island that has Bocas del Toro town on it, and also Isla Bastimentos, which is there a little bit to the southeast. There are caves on both islands and some of the other islands too. Nivida or Bat Cave is on Bastimentos, and La Gruta is on Colón. It works out that even though only part of the island of Bastimentos is in a national park, it is the part that the cave is in that part of the island. It is part of the park. So here's kind of a look at the islands again in Google Earth with some GPS locations. As you can see, La Gruta is kind of just right there in the middle of the island. Nivida, we've got some back and front entrances for those locations there. And that is, as far as we know from Keith and James, the longest cave in Panama at about 2 kilometers, so not particularly long. We had some trip objectives. We wanted to make some good quality maps and look for leads. We're also interested in comparing how the caves of the area formed. We know we had fluvial caves with streams. We know we had sea caves in the same limestone. Wanted to see if there were flank margin caves and if we had an area where all three types of these caves develop in very close proximity to each other in the same limestone. We feel like it could be really interesting and informative in terms of what influences cave morphology. We also just wanted to get to know the area and assess it for future projects. Really was kind of a reconnaissance trip to kind of check the place out. And of course, we wanted to meet local folks, make some connections, and see what we thought of the people in the place. So that was kind of what we were there to do. Here's the crew. We've got Brad Hacker from California, Pat Cambyses from Kentucky, and Jed Rosenfelder from Minnesota. And here's kind of Boca's town a little bit. Nice, pleasant place. It's a provincial capital, but I mean, it's tiny compared to Panama City. You can easily walk across the town. Mixture of tourists and expats, quite a few Americans and Europeans, as well as local people. It's a real scenic area. Plenty of nice places to eat, both local and with a little bit higher end tourist food. The lower photograph is the view from our hotel, looking back towards the Panamanian mainland and the mountains that are there. First cave was La Gruta, as I mentioned. Luckily, it was easy to find. They've got signs right to it. This is kind of a very low-key tourist attraction that's along the main road that goes through Cologne. The cave is composed of 4 segments that we mapped up along with some bridges and such. Nice wet cave. Here's one of the entrances with Jed, and inside the cave, well decorated, lots of bats, lots of cave wildlife. There's looking down into one of the unroofed segments, and there's entering the lower segment of the cave, the most downstream one. This one went into a particularly big hill. We hoped it would continue for a ways, but it turns out it was not that wide of a hill, and we kind of popped out on the other side at the end of the cave. Dieffenbachia, the friendly plant that some of you probably have in your home right now. Well, most of you are probably aware that it is one of many poisonous houseplants. Well, in tropical areas where it occurs naturally, including in Bocas del Toro here in Panama, it also leaves residues in the soil that are irritating and toxic to people. As we were finishing the La Gruta survey, Pat and I were sketching. Jed and Brad went out a small kind of muddy little entrance in the bottom of a sinkhole. And on the way back in, got a little muddy and very quickly began to have a lot of itching and burning sensations. We weren't at all sure what was going on with them. Pat and I kind of finished up the sketch, and those guys headed back. We found them kind of writhing in the water. Jed was mumbling about burning and itching and pain, and Brad was strutting around doing some very kind of odd dance. Pat and I weren't sure if we should laugh or call an ambulance. It was kind of an odd moment, but very slowly it did begin backing off, and they slowly got better. And it turns out the problem is the Dieffenbachia plants and what they leave in the soil in cave entrances. It's a well-known problem in the area, as you can imagine. James had written about it in his trip reports. We goofed up and hadn't read that part. And so we kind of blew it. Although I must say, Pat and I were really more than happy to learn from others' experiences and not repeat the Jed and Brad experience. It looked pretty uncomfortable and unpleasant. So here's some looks at La Gruta. You can see the multiple segments. There it is on Google Earth. And here it is again, as rendered by Compass. And you can see how it's kind of divided up. Nice little series of stream caves. Our next objective was to take a boat and go on over to Bastimentos Island to go to Nivida Cave. Boats are kind of how people get around at Bocas del Toro. It's kind of like their version of cars, essentially. You need one to go just about anywhere because it's all islands that are inhabited and scattered across a pretty wide area. So there's lots of boats to hire, easy to do, and pretty quickly we were off. The cave's well known. It's part of the national park and just a little bit of a tourist attraction, although not as well known as La Gruta. Here's just kind of the view on the way. Pleasant tropical scenery, nice jungly islands. Here we are coming into the mangroves that are kind of on the edge of the shore there to where we parked the boat to head into the cave. Obviously, our boat owner and captain was having a good time. I'm not so sure about Jed. And here it is, Nivida Cave. So like I said before, the longest we know of in Panama. There are a number of leads and entrances. We surveyed about 1 kilometer in 2 days. The cave is good and wet, plenty of swimming and wading and little waterfalls and all sorts of stuff like that. The first part was really well decorated and not particularly spacious. This would be kind of where Pat is, and pretty darn wet. There were a couple of near ear dips in these areas and such. But then as we got further into the cave, things did open up. The passages were larger, a lot fewer speleothems, and it just kind of became big, meandering canyon. So quite pleasant to survey and explore. Here's a couple shots. Of course, we got soaking wet. And here we've got some cave life. Of course, in these tropical caves, there's lots of things living in there. Bats, all sorts of invertebrates, including this amberpligid. Here's a couple shots of Jed and Hutiliano Viagra. Hutiliano is a local person whose family has lived in the area literally for hundreds of years. He's a native. He speaks the native language. And so he is kind of the caretaker of the cave, him and his family. He's a guide there. And he really was just curious what we were up to and came along with us for the day on our second trip to the cave. The photograph on the right there is him and Jed at one of the back cave entrances. We actually didn't survey quite this far, but we felt like when we needed to end the survey, we couldn't be too far from the back entrances that James had told us about. And so we pushed ahead to check it out, and sure enough did find that there's a series of entrances back there. Although we also did find that, as far as we know, the cave passage, at least some of the passages, do continue. It's going to be a complex area there at the back of the cave with actually probably a fair amount of survey to do. One of the neat things about the entrances were these poison dart frogs. And in this particular case, we've got an orange one here. There were some green ones, some spotted ones, some red ones. These guys are really tiny. They could sit on a dime, but they were pretty cool to see. And there are often a lot of them in the cave entrances. They seem to like the super high humidity that was in those spots. There were some nice fossils and some interesting concretions in the rock. And in the stream, we ran into kind of a rather interesting animal, some very long-lived crayfish, maybe about 2 feet long, with pink eyes on their kind of long eye stalks. We first ran into these guys heading into the cave. There's one in a pool that Pat was kind of climbing over. It kind of looked like it was dead, so laying on its side. But no, sure enough, it kind of zipped off as she climbed over it and kind of gave me the heebie-jeebies. They were pretty big, and I wouldn't want to get bit by one of those claws. Coming back out, we ran into a whole bunch more of these guys. They're pretty interesting to have when you're swimming around in water and you're thinking about these 6-inch long claws that are in there with you. So it was the pink-eyed, long-limbed crayfish. Looked a little bit like a giant freshwater prawn, but the coloration was pretty different, generally the shape. So that was some interesting cave life in Nivida Cave. So here's Nivida, both in the compass view and Google Earth. You can see the entrance where we went in over on the left, and you can see kind of the edge of the national park there where the clearing begins on the left. That is the resurgence where the water is flowing out of the cave, and then we follow it upstream to where our survey ended, and then to the north, we've got a couple more GPS points at some of the other entrances where the frogs were. So plenty more to survey here. There is a whole other cave system south of here that's parallel with a couple of caves divided by sumps. North of here, there are other caves and quite a few sinkholes on the topo map. And so there's really a lot more cave development here. James and his crew have explored quite a bit of it, but there's more to be checked out, and we look forward to doing that in the future. So here's the map of Nivida so far. Got this drafted up here a few weeks ago. We've got a number of leads at the back of the cave, a few towards the front of the cave, and some side passages and such, and hopefully some connections to the other caves that are south of this one. So a real nice cave, a lot of fun survey, and certainly a nice one to explore and map. Kind of for our final project, we were doing some time looking at caves on the coast, both at the north end of Cologne and on the east side of Cologne, that particular island. We almost had no luck whatsoever on the north end. We had a nice hike on the beach, but didn't even really find any limestone. We were clearly not in the right location. We're going to get a little more information there. Here we were giving some tips by our friends at our hotel that we made, who were some surfers. And the surfers, of course, know their coast really well, and they told us about this outcrop of limestone, which is on the geologic maps and was mapped and is known for caves. So you can see some of the limestone, little beach bungalow house up there to the left. And so what we're really looking for here was sea caves, although there were some little sinkholes on the coast, some little, very tiny little caves draining towards the coast. We did find some a little bit inland from the coast too that were a little bit more extensive. But here we mainly found sea caves. This is actually a swim-through cave that our our hotel neighbors had told us about. At this tide level, it was not something we were going to swim through, that was for sure. But we did try to document it, measure it, kind of assess it. Pat took some notes and things and kind of documented this one. And like I said, we traveled inland and just a couple hundred meters and found quite a few sinkholes and other caves in areas where the geology is not shown to be limestone. But James had recorded caves in this area, and so we found a number of them, quite a few of little caves that don't go too far. So overall, we had a good adventure. There's Pat kind of recording data and information. So overall, we had a good adventure in Panama. We look forward to going back. It's probably just the start of the project. Of course, Bocas is a really beautiful area with wonderful islands and some nice caves, but there's a lot more caves and karsts in Panama as James has been exploring. So we hope to continue to work with him and continue to do more in the area and go back again. And I do want to mention one more thing, and that is, do remember, Black lives do matter. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and have a good virtual NSS convention.